Welcome, wanderer. Tonight the Firefly drifts across Scandinavian farmland to a place where old traditions have been forgotten and ancient partnerships broken. Here, a daughter returns to the father she abandoned, inheriting not just land and animals, but a responsibility she never knew existed. This is a story about earning back what was lost through neglect, about proving yourself worthy of trust, and about the household spirit who watches from the shadows, waiting to see if this generation will remember what the last one nearly forgot. The farm looked smaller than Ingrid remembered. She stood at the end of the gravel drive, her rental car idling behind her, and studied the red-painted barn, the white farmhouse with its dark trim, the fields stretching toward forest in the distance. 17 years since she'd last been here. 17 years since her mother had taken her to Oslo after the divorce, and she'd chosen not to look back. Now there was no choice. Her father was gone, buried 3 days ago in the village cemetery, and the farm was hers. The lawyer had been apologetic when he'd explained. No other family, no will, really. Just a brief note expressing the hope that Ingrid might want the land. She'd almost laughed. Want it? She barely remembered it, but something, guilt, curiosity, a need to understand the father she'd abandoned, had made her get on a plane. The house smelled of wood smoke and old coffee when she let herself in. Everything was tidy in a utilitarian way. Dishes clean but mismatched, furniture worn but cared for. A bachelor's life lived alone. She found herself looking for signs of the man she'd left behind, but found only the stranger he'd become in her absence. The first week passed in a blur of paperwork and decisions. The livestock, a dozen dairy cows, some chickens, one ancient goat, needed tending. The neighbor, an elderly man named Henrik, had been caring for them since her father's heart attack, but he couldn't continue indefinitely. Ingrid found herself falling into routines she'd forgotten she knew. Feeding times, milking schedules, the particular way the barn door stuck unless you lifted while pushing. Things ran smoothly at first. The cows were healthy, the chickens productive. The old equipment, though worn, functioned. Henrik came by most mornings, checking on her progress, offering quiet advice. He rarely mentioned her father directly, but she saw judgment in his silence, in the way he watched her handle tools or move through spaces her father had occupied. She found the letter on the 8th day, tucked into a book on her father's nightstand. The envelope had her name on it in her father's careful handwriting, but it had never been sealed, never been sent. Inside, 2 pages. My dear Ingrid, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I've started this letter a dozen times over the years and never found the courage to send it. But I'm getting older, and there are things you should know if you ever come back to this place. I know you think I chose the farm over our family. Your mother believed that too. Maybe it's true in some ways, but what neither of you understood is that this farm isn't just land and animals. It's a responsibility that goes back further than our family name, further than the deed in the desk drawer. Your grandmother knew. She taught me when I was young, made me promise to keep the old ways. There is a Tomte here, Ingrid. I know how that sounds. I know you'll think I've gone soft in my old age, but he's real. He's protected this farm for longer than anyone can remember, kept the animals safe, the land fertile, the work manageable. In return, all he asks is remembrance. Porridge with butter on the hearth, respect for the old corners, acknowledgement that we're not alone here. I stopped after you left. I was angry, hurt. I told myself it was superstition, that I'd been a fool to believe. The farm suffered. I nearly lost everything before I swallowed my pride and asked him back. He returned, but something was broken between us. He did his duty, but the joy was gone. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Maybe you've sold already. Move on to the life you wanted. But if you're here, if you've stayed even for a little while, I want you to know. Take care of him. Leave the porridge. Speak respectfully. Don't make my mistake of taking this partnership for granted. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you needed. I hope the farm can be something better for you than it was for us. Signed, Far. Ingrid sat on the edge of her father's bed, the letter trembling in her hands. A Tomte, a household spirit from the old stories her grandmother used to tell before bedtime, back when she was small enough to believe in such things. Her father had believed, had maintained some kind of relationship with a creature that shouldn't exist. She wanted to dismiss it as the rambling of a lonely man. But something in the careful handwriting, the vulnerability in the words, made her pause. Her father had been many things, but he'd never been fanciful. That evening, she searched the kitchen until she found what she was looking for. A small wooden bowl, old and smooth with use, tucked in the back of the highest shelf. She cooked porridge the way her grandmother had taught her, stirring slowly, adding butter at the end. She placed the bowl on the hearth, the stone ledge beside the old wood stove, and stood there, feeling foolish and hopeful in equal measure. Nothing happened. She went to bed wondering if her father's mind had been failing, if grief and isolation had driven him to invent companionship where none existed. The next morning, the bowl was still full, and that's when things began to go wrong. The milk separator jammed, something that had never happened during Henrik's care. 2 chickens escaped their coop through a gap that hadn't been there the day before. The ancient tractor, which had started reliably all week, refused to turn over. Small things, each explicable on its own, but accumulating into a weight of wrongness that made Ingrid's chest tight. She left porridge again that night. Again, it sat untouched. By the end of the second week, she was exhausted. The fence in the east pasture needed mending. The barn roof was leaking in 3 places. One of the cows had mastitis. She was spending money she didn't have on repairs that seemed to multiply overnight. And every morning, the porridge bowl mocked her with its congealed, uneaten contents. Henrik found her in the barn on a grey afternoon, fighting with a broken harness, close to tears. "Your father never had this much trouble," he said. And it wasn't quite an accusation, but it felt like one. "My father had help," Ingrid said, surprising herself. Henrik's expression shifted, something knowing passing across his weathered face. He pulled a stool close and sat, regarding her seriously. "He told you then, about the Tomte." She showed him the letter. Henrik read it slowly, his lips moving slightly, then handed it back with a sigh. "Your grandmother taught him well, kept the old ways all her life. Your father continued after she passed. The porridge, the respect, all of it. The farm thrived because of it." Henrik paused, choosing his words carefully. "After the divorce, after you and your mother left, he stopped for a while. Angry, hurt. The Tomte left then, went to the Anderson farm down the valley. Your father nearly lost everything that year. Crops failed, animals sickened, equipment broke. Took him months to understand what he'd done. What did he do? Swallowed his pride, went to the old farm, left porridge there, apologized aloud for his anger and neglect, asked the Tomte to come home. Henrik's expression softened, and he did. Came back and stayed faithful until your father died. 17 years of partnership after that mistake. Your father never forgot again. Ingrid felt something twist in her chest. Her father had kept the tradition all those years, maintained this impossible relationship. But now he's gone again, she asked. The Tomte? Henrik nodded slowly. A Tomte stays with a farm as long as someone there knows him, honors him. When your father passed and you arrived, you didn't know. You couldn't have known. But to the Tomte, it looked like the old pattern. Another generation that doesn't believe, doesn't remember. He's gone back to the Anderson farm, waiting to see if this place is worth returning to. The Anderson farm, Ingrid said slowly. It's still empty. 30 years now. No one wants these old places anymore. But a Tomte doesn't need people to protect a place. He'll stay there, tending what he can, hoping someone worthy might come along. Henrik stood stiffly. If you want him back, you'll need to prove you're not like the ones who forget. Porridge is a start, but it's not enough. Not after he's been disappointed. That night, Ingrid lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the farmhouse windows. She thought about her father, alone here for 17 years, maintaining a relationship with a being she'd never believed in. She thought about responsibilities that stretched back generations, about partnerships that transcended the visible world. She left porridge on the hearth as she had every night, but this time she spoke aloud into the empty kitchen. I know you're not here. I know I've failed some test I didn't know I was taking. But I'm trying. I'm learning. If you're listening, if you're anywhere near, I could use the help. Please. Silence answered her. The house creaked and settled. The porridge steamed gently on the hearth. In the morning, it was still full. The days blurred together after that. March deepened into April, the snow melting to reveal mud and brown fields. Ingrid worked until her hands blistered, then worked through the blisters until they calloused. She learned which cows were easy and which were stubborn, which parts of the fence the goat could breach, how to coax the old tractor into cooperation. Henrik helped when he could, but he had his own farm to manage. The barn cat, a grey tabby her father had called Loki, became her constant companion. It would disappear for hours, then return looking satisfied, curling up in sunny spots to sleep. Sometimes Ingrid envied the cat its simplicity. Eat, sleep, hunt, repeat. No complicated emotions, no inherited responsibilities. The storm came on the 3rd week of April. Weather forecasts predicted rain, but what arrived was something angrier. Wind that bent trees double. Rain that fell in sheets so thick the barn disappeared from view. Ingrid secured what she could, brought the animals into shelter, and retreated to the house as lightning turned the afternoon to strobing brightness and shadow. She was making tea when she realized Loki was missing. The cat was old, maybe 15 or 16. Her father had adopted it as a kitten. It knew to come inside during storms. But when Ingrid checked all its usual spots, the armchair, the bed, the warm spot behind the stove, the cat was nowhere. The barn? It must be in the barn. She pulled on her father's old rain jacket and ran across the yard, rain immediately soaking through her jeans. The barn was warm with animal breath and the smell of hay. She called for Loki, searching the stalls, the hayloft, the tack room. A crash of thunder, louder than the rest, a smell like a burning metal. Ingrid turned to see flame licking up the far wall of the barn, where lightning had struck through the damaged roof. The fire spread impossibly fast, feeding on dry wood and old hay, smoke filling the space in seconds. The animals. She needed to get the animals out, but first, a small grey shape huddled in the burning corner, frozen in terror. Ingrid didn't think. She ran toward the flames, grabbed Loki by the scruff, and ran back. The cat yowled and scratched, panicked, but she held on, bursting out into the rain just as part of the roof collapsed behind her. Henrik appeared from nowhere, helping her move the animals to temporary shelter in the shed. The fire department came, though, by the time they arrived, the rain had done most of their work. The damage was contained to one corner of the barn, but it was significant. The structure compromised, equipment destroyed, hay stores ruined. Ingrid sat on the porch steps as the fire truck pulled away. Loki pressed against her side, both of them soaked and shaking. The loss settled into her bones. The money this would cost, the time, the impossibility of managing alone. The developer's offer arrived 2 days later, as though summoned by her despair. The letter was professional, sympathetic. They understood she'd inherited unexpectedly. They knew the farm had suffered damage. They were prepared to make a generous offer, one that would allow her to start fresh elsewhere. The property had development potential, tourism perhaps, or a rural retreat. They were also in negotiations to purchase the Anderson property down the valley. A package deal would benefit everyone. Ingrid held the letter and felt the weight of choice pressing down on her. She could leave, take the money, return to Oslo, forget about Tomtes and traditions, and the father she'd barely known. It would be the sensible thing, the easy thing. That night, she sat in the damaged barn, in the one corner that still felt safe. Loki was curled in her lap, purring despite everything. The cows shuffled in their temporary housing. Rain pattered on the partially collapsed roof. "I don't know what to do," she said aloud, and her voice cracked. "Far, I don't know what you wanted from me. I don't know how to be what this place needs." The tears came then, finally, for her father, for the years they'd lost, for the child she'd been who'd walked away and never looked back, for the farm that had mattered more to him than she'd understood, for the partnership he'd maintained with something she still couldn't quite believe in. "I'm sorry I left," she whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm sorry I don't know how to earn your help. Whoever you are, whatever you are, just please, give me a sign. Show me what I'm supposed to do." The barn was silent except for rain and animal sounds. Loki purred on, undisturbed by her tears. Ingrid carried the cat back to the house and fell asleep in her father's chair, exhausted beyond dreaming. She woke to dawn light streaming through the kitchen window and the smell of coffee she hadn't made. On the kitchen table sat a fresh cup, still steaming, and beside it, impossible and undeniable, was a small red knitted cap, no bigger than her fist, the kind she remembered from her grandmother's stories. Ingrid picked it up with shaking hands. The wool was soft, old, lovingly maintained, real, solid. She looked around the kitchen, seeing nothing, but knowing with absolute certainty that she wasn't alone. Had never been alone, not since she'd arrived. The Tomte had been here, watching, waiting to see what kind of person she was, whether she was worth returning to. The burned barn, the rescued cat, the breaking down and asking for help. This was his answer. She placed the cap carefully on the shelf above the hearth, next to where she left the porridge. Her hands were steady now, her decision made. "Thank you," she said to the empty kitchen. "I'll stay, I'll learn, I'll do this right." That morning, she wrote to the developers and declined their offer. She contacted a carpenter about barn repairs. She called her mother for the first time in months and told her she wouldn't be coming back to Oslo. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The work was still hard, the repairs were expensive, but things shifted. The equipment that had been failing began to cooperate. Small problems resolved themselves mysteriously, a lost tool reappearing exactly where it was needed, a gate latching properly that had been broken, animals settling contentedly when before they'd been restless. The porridge disappeared each night. Ingrid never saw the Tomte clearly. Sometimes she thought she caught movement in her peripheral vision, a small figure ducking behind the barn, a shadow that didn't quite match the light. But when she looked directly, nothing was there. She learned not to look. Instead, she learned to feel his presence in other ways. The warmth of the barn on cold mornings, the sense of companionship when she worked alone, the knowledge that the farm was protected, tended, loved by something older and steadier than her grief. Spring deepened into early summer. The repaired barn stood solid. The fields greened, the cows grazed contentedly, and Ingrid found herself understanding the rhythms her father had lived by, the partnership he'd maintained. One morning in June, she was photographing the barn for insurance purposes. Loki was sunning himself on the fence, looking smug and healthy after his ordeal. Ingrid snapped several photos of the cat, laughing at his dignified expression. That evening, reviewing the photos on her laptop, she saw it. Behind Loki, just barely visible in the shadow of the barn door, was a figure, small, perhaps 3 feet tall, wearing work clothes and a red cap. The face was unclear, the features indistinct, but the shape was undeniable. He was looking directly at the camera, or perhaps at her through the camera, and though she couldn't see his expression, she felt the acknowledgement in that gaze. "We see each other now," it seemed to say. "We understand each other." Ingrid didn't try to enlarge the photo or enhance it. She saved it as it was and closed the laptop. Some things were meant to be glimpsed, not examined. Some partnerships thrived in mystery and respect, not in proof and documentation. She went to the kitchen and prepared the evening porridge, the ritual familiar now, comforting. She set it on the hearth next to the red cap, which she'd kept safe in its place of honor. "Good night," she said to the quiet house. "Thank you for staying, for giving me another chance." The farm settled around her, warm and alive. Outside, the summer evening stretched long and golden. The cows were safe, the barn stood strong, and somewhere in the shadows between buildings, in the spaces humans couldn't quite see, an ancient being went about his work, protecting what had been entrusted to his care for generations. Ingrid pulled out writing paper and began a letter to her mother, trying to explain why she was staying, what she'd found here in this place she'd once abandoned. The words came slowly at first, then easier. "I'm learning Far's ways," she wrote, "the rhythms he lived by, the partnership he maintained with this land. I think I'm finally starting to understand what he was trying to tell me all along, why he couldn't leave, why this place mattered so much. This farm isn't just mine, it never was, and maybe that's what makes it home." Outside, the northern twilight painted the fields in shades of blue and gold. A small grey cat sat on the windowsill, keeping watch. And in the kitchen, on the shelf above the hearth, a red cap stood as testament to promises kept, to traditions honoured, to the quiet magic of homecoming. The red cap sits on the shelf above the hearth now, a promise kept and honoured. We learn that some relationships must be earned twice, first through tradition, then through sacrifice and humility. We discover that inheritance is more than property. It's the duty to tend what generations before us have protected. And we find that home isn't just a place we return to, but a partnership we choose to honor, even with those we cannot see. Sleep well, dear wanderer. May you find the courage to tend what's been entrusted to your care. And may those who watch from the shadows know they are remembered.